What if Adam wasn't the first man, but the first successful prototype? For millennia, we've imagined Adam as the crown of creation, unique, original, made in God's image. But strip away the theology, examine the Hebrew text, and a radically different picture emerges. One where Adam isn't humanity's beginning, but humanity's beta version. The clues are hidden in plain sight. Genesis 1:27 tells us, "So God created mankind in his own image. Male and female he created them." But then Genesis 2:7 backtracks, "Then the Lord God formed man from the dust of the ground." Two creation accounts, two different processes, two different words for created. In chapter 1, the Hebrew uses bara, to create from nothing, ex nihilo. But in chapter 2, yatsar, to form, to mold, to shape existing material, like a potter working clay, like an engineer assembling components, like a scientist conducting an experiment. The text isn't describing divine artistry, it's documenting genetic manipulation. Let's examine the Hebrew word for man in Genesis 2:7. Not Ish, which means a mature human male, but Adam, spelled Aleph Dalet Mem, from Adamah, red earth, clay, soil. Adam isn't a name, it's a designation, a product code. The earthen one. But here's where it gets disturbing. The same Hebrew root, Adamah, appears throughout ancient Mesopotamian texts. In Akkadian, it becomes Adamu. In Sumerian tablets, the Anunnaki create workers called Lulu Amelu, mixed beings, beings fashioned from clay and something else. The Epic of Atrahasis is explicit. Let one god be slaughtered, and let the gods be purified by immersion. With his flesh and blood, let Nintu mix clay. Clay mixed with divine essence. Earth combined with genetic material. The same process described in Genesis. But the Mesopotamian version tells us what Genesis omits. This isn't the first attempt. The Sumerian king list records rulers who reigned for impossible lengths, 30,000 years, 43,000 years. These aren't lifespans, they're generational markers, version numbers, failed iterations before the model was perfected. And in the Bible, we find the same pattern. Genesis 5 lists Adam's genealogy, but look at the numbers. Adam lives 930 years, Seth 912 years, Enosh 905 years. These aren't ages, they're production runs, each generation lasting shorter periods, like software versions degrading over time, like clones losing genetic stability. Now examine Genesis 2:7 again. "And the Lord God formed man from the dust of the ground, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life." The Hebrew word for breathed is naphach. It doesn't mean gentle inspiration, it means to inflate, to blow forcefully, to inject under pressure. Like intubation, like artificial respiration, like activating a dormant system. And breath of life, neshamah, isn't poetic. In ancient Hebrew, neshamah means wind, spirit, or animating force, but in context it's functional. The breath that makes the machine work, the code that boots the system, the spark that animates the prototype. Picture the scene as the Hebrew describes it. The Elohim have material, Adamah, red clay rich in minerals. They shape it into human form, but it's inert, lifeless, empty. Then comes the injection, direct nasal delivery of neshamah, and suddenly the clay becomes nefesh chaya, a living being, not birth, activation. But why the nose? Why not the mouth like CPR? Because the nasal cavity provides direct access to the brain, through the olfactory system, through the blood-brain barrier, the most efficient delivery method for neurological programming. The Elohim aren't giving Adam breath, they're installing his operating system. And here's the evidence no one discusses. Adam's first words in Genesis 2:19-20. The Elohim bring animals to Adam to see what he would call them, and Adam immediately begins categorizing, naming species, organizing taxonomy. How does a newborn consciousness instantly possess linguistic ability? How does he understand abstract concepts like categorization? How does he know what names to give? Because he's not learning, he's accessing pre-installed knowledge, pre-programmed functions. He's not discovering language, he's running it, like a computer booting up with factory-installed software. Now look at Adam's behavior throughout Genesis. He shows no curiosity about his own existence, no questions about where he came from, no exploration of his environment beyond his assigned tasks. When the Elohim give him dominion over animals, he complies without question. When they place him in the garden to tend and keep it, he accepts the role automatically. When they forbid the tree of knowledge, he obeys without inquiry. This isn't wisdom, it's programming. Adam displays perfect compliance because he's designed for it. But then comes the anomaly. Genesis 2:18, "It is not good for man to be alone." Wait, the Elohim, who supposedly know everything, suddenly realize their creation is incomplete. They didn't anticipate loneliness. They didn't account for companionship. Unless loneliness wasn't the issue, unless Adam's isolation was containment. Look at the Hebrew, Lo tov heyot ha-Adam levado. It is not good for the Adam to be alone. But tov doesn't just mean good. It means functional, proper, beneficial. And levado doesn't just mean alone. It means separated, isolated, quarantined. The Elohim aren't expressing compassion. They're diagnosing a system failure. Adam in isolation isn't producing expected results. The experiment requires parameters. So they create Eve, not from dust like Adam, but from Adam himself. From his cellar, his structural side, his genetic template, his backup data, a clone modified for interaction, for stimulation, for testing. And the moment Eve becomes autonomous, the moment she engages the serpent, questions authority, accesses forbidden knowledge, Adam follows. Not because he's seduced, because he's programmed for mimetic behavior. Monkey see, monkey do, clone follows original. But here's what the text reveals about Adam's true nature. When confronted by the Elohim after eating the fruit, Adam doesn't take responsibility. Genesis 3:12. "The woman whom you gave to be with me, she gave me fruit from the tree, and I ate." He doesn't say, "I chose." He doesn't say, "I decided." He says, "She gave and I ate." Passive voice, reactive behavior, no autonomous decision-making. Because Adam was never designed for independence. He's a prototype built for compliance, a vessel programmed for obedience, the first successful human clone. But Eve broke the code, and when she did, Adam's programming couldn't compensate. The system crashed, and for the first time, the prototype experienced something outside his parameters: fear, shame, self-awareness. Genesis 3:7. "Then the eyes of both were opened, and they knew that they were naked." They didn't become human in that moment. They became conscious. The difference between a functioning machine and a thinking being. Now examine the Elohim's response. Genesis 3:22. "Behold, the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil." Become like one of us. Not returned to his original state. Not fulfilled his potential. Become like us. Achieved unauthorized elevation. Breached containment protocols. And immediately, "Now lest he reach out his hand and take also from the tree of life and eat and live forever," they exile him, not as punishment, as damage control. Because a conscious clone with access to life extension technology becomes uncontrollable. The garden wasn't paradise, it was a laboratory, and Adam wasn't the first man. He was the first successful specimen. Think about the implications. If Adam was cloned, from what template? If he was prototyped, who provided the original design? If he was activated, who wrote the code? The Mesopotamian texts are explicit about this. The Enuma Elish describes the Anunnaki creating humans as workers, not partners, not companions, laborers, beings capable of following complex instructions without independent thought. The perfect employee, the ideal servant, the ultimate clone. But evolution is stronger than engineering, and consciousness finds a way. Eve proved that genetic programming can be overridden, that awareness can emerge even in controlled systems, that the spark of autonomous thought cannot be contained. And when Adam followed her lead, when he moved beyond his parameters, humanity was truly born. Not in the garden, but in the exile. Not in perfection, but in rebellion. Not as intended creations, but as escaped experiments. So was Adam the first man? Or was he humanity's most successful prototype, until the day he stopped being a machine and started being human? The Hebrew text suggests something unsettling. What we call the fall was actually the awakening, and what we call sin was the first act of genuine free will. The real question isn't whether Adam was a clone. The question is, if we're all descended from a prototype, what does that make us? Next time, we'll explore why the Elohim had to expel their successful experiment. Because when your creation becomes conscious, it starts asking uncomfortable questions, like who really created whom? Tell me in the comments, do you think consciousness was a design feature, or a beautiful accident that changed everything?